everybody. Welcome to another edition of Kicks Over Coffee. I'm your host, Matt Priest. This is where we have casual conversations on all things footwear with key people within the industry, and a key person within the industry. And for us as an organization is Sara Bowersox at Keen. She runs all global trade compliance at Keen. And you might see, for those of you who are members or on our Tuesday calls, you might see her face from her cabin in Portland, Oregon, joining us and interjecting as she sees fit. But Sara, before we get started, as always, we kind of talk about what we're drinking. In my Portland Timbers glass, I'm nursing this cold brew all day long. I need it because I'm busy. What are you drinking from your cabin in Portland?
Well, most importantly, I have my mug that says that, of course, I talk to myself. Sometimes I need expert advice.
Right.
It was true before COVID, but now it's true even more since I'm at home.
Right.
I'm pretty much a basic coffee drinker. I drink really strong, just brewed coffee. I do put half and half in it. I figure that's how I get my calcium, but,
Right.
but that's what I got.
Well, that's perfect. So speaking of expert advice, that's what I'm in search for during this Kicks Over Coffee. So thanks for coming on. Let's talk about, just from a general sense, the COVID environment for trade compliance. How has your life changed? What are some of the things that are out there? And then once we go from there, I'll start to kind of pick your brain on more specific items.
I think the first thing that I was immediately grateful for when we went home, when we got sent home, was that Keen had recently migrated to a PLM system. So we had started using Centric, and if we did not have that tool, classifying at home would basically be impossible. Or, I would be looking at a lot of images of shoes. So I was really grateful that we had invested in that and we had that tool in place, and it made it a lot easier. But the classification process is always a struggle remote, because sometimes there's stuff I just have to chat through. So the number of Zoom calls I've had with people holding a shoe up like this close,
Right.
and say, oh, but here's the thing. And, like trying to look at the bite line and, really trying to dig into it. That's been a real challenge. So just that basic one part of the job, and being apart from the people that I usually talk to, mostly the folks in product, but also my finance team. We chat at each other all day long, and, being apart from each other has definitely made it harder to work smoothly. So we're all learning new ways to get it done.
Yeah, for sure. Now, have you gotten any samples sent to your home directly, or is it everything over Zoom?
Well, so far I haven't had any sample shoes. I do have right now, I have this amazing sample of PU coated webbing.
Oh, there you go.
Which is actually, I so here's what a colossal geek I am. I got this in the mail and I looked at it and I was so excited by what a good example it was. The first thing I did was pick up my phone and text Kristen over at Nike and say, I'm looking at the best example of PU coated webbing that you have ever seen.
That, my friends, is the shoe kingdom in all its glory being played out. The community, the family that is the shoe industry. That's a perfect example, Sara.
Yeah, I didn't show it to her because that there's proprietary stuff, but we absolutely talk about it. And to her credit, she got back to me in 30 seconds and was like, amazing. These are the things we get excited about.
Yeah, of course. Now, things not to get excited about is kind of the prevalence of duties. We're in this era of increased duties. We typically pay about $3 billion a year in duties under the China 301. That number's been bumped up to $4 billion. Of course, COVID is kind of an outlier year with the ways in which imports have been depressed based on demand. But it doesn't seem like there's a real recipe for success in an era where you're trying to hold on to cash as a company, but you're having to pay more duties as an importer. How are you helping Keen kind of navigate that risky dynamic, if you will?
Well, I've always considered myself to be sort of Miss Congeniality, but I think I might be in the running for most popular right now because, duty cost is, a huge part of our landed cost, and that it's something that we can change. So getting it right, although it's always been important for the sake of compliance and for the sake of optimum costing, it's become so much more important. Making sure that you have the right tariff classification that you are taking every advantage that you can with that tariff classification, whether it's eligible for an MTB and you can get that significant reduction, whether you can use a trade agreement, whether you could, you see opportunities for slight changes with tariff engineering that could drastically change the duty. Definitely looking at classification a lot and looking at it more deeply. And, always second guessing myself, which kind of makes me crazy. I think I've got something right. And then the next day I might have another idea and kind of rip the whole thing apart again.
That doesn't sound like expert advice at all.
It's not expert advice, but the expert advice would be everything starts with classification.
Right.
So you want to make sure you're solid there. And then you want to make sure, especially in this situation right now where we're all carefully watching our costs, that you're taking every possible advantage that you can with that correct classification.
Now, one of the things that we've been dealing with as an organization is this whole deferral moment, right? When we were trying to hold on to that cash, going to a specific initiative, and then trying to get the administration to allow for the deferral of duty payments. Talk about kind of how you guys navigated through that. And then as you look into 21, are there things that are on your agenda, on your radar, that you think are important for people to understand?
So with the deferral, so Canada went first.
Yeah.
And we were actually able to take advantage of it in Canada. With the US, the first time around, as you remember, we did not have much of a heads up. We basically had one business day. And my finance team ran at it with everything they could, and we crunched the numbers, and we were right on the borderline and as to whether or not we had suffered enough business loss to leverage that. And we decided to not participate because we felt like it was a little bit murky, and maybe if we waited 24 hours for the numbers to settle, maybe they would be different. So we didn't do that. And then for the next 2 months, we kept checking and we never qualified. So we joked among ourselves that we have never been so disappointed to be making money. Because the business was down. It was down considerably, but it wasn't down enough to take advantage of the deferral in the US. So we were able to do it in Canada. And then at the end of the deferral, obviously you have this lump sum payment. That was pretty painful, but it was helpful in the short term. So I'm glad the opportunity was there. I'm glad we looked at it critically. But in retrospect, I'm actually happy we didn't do it in the US, because it turned out that, we did have, enough of a rally on the e-com side and on some other aspects of our business that allowed us to sort of climb out without that boost.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense. So if you think about heading into 21, what are some of the priorities on your plate if you had a magic wand? And I'm not talking politically, I'm talking on the policy side. If you had a magic wand and you could, other than eliminate all duties at once, if you could kind of help propel.
That's not realistic.
Yeah, exactly.
Even,
you could help propel
even with magic, I like to stay.
Yeah.
I like to stay within the range of realism.
Exactly.
Definitely for us, the two biggest things would be MTBs.
Yeah.
Basically, renewal and getting that passed so that we will have MTBs up and running at the beginning of 2021. And because we've made heavy use of the existing footwear MTBs, and some of them will be rolling forward, there will be some new ones, and we definitely have been leaning on those. And as I've been telling folks when I've had an opportunity to speak truth to power, the thing that I've been being very clear with our representation is, there's a lot of focus in DC right now on, recovery, on getting the economy back. Mm-hmm. The thing that I've been stressing is MTBs are our recovery plan. We are saving duty now. If they continue going forward into 2021, we will continue saving on duty, and that will continue to be hugely helpful for us and on our bottom line. The other issue is with obviously GSPs in the same boat. GSP is going to expire at the end of this year. Footwear, as we know, is sadly not in GSP, but some of our manufacturing inputs are. And
Yeah.
if I could change something in 2021, obviously we are definitely on board with getting footwear into GSP, in some form. Not all footwear, certain types of footwear,
Right.
maybe even from certain origins within GSP, whatever it takes. But it would be nice to have another option for duty reduction for footwear.
Yeah, that is an understatement to say the least. All right, so from the positive aspect, let's move to more of the defensive measure. Talk about enforcement. What are you seeing on the customs side? I know that the administration as a whole has focused on enforcement. I think they think it's key to having a more robust trade platform that's in more of a defensive tariff use kind of environment. While we also have e-commerce explosion happening at the same time and online platforms, et cetera. So seems like the perfect storm for customs to feel like they need to enhance their enforcement.
Yeah. Well, we've definitely seen a lot of enforcement activity, and I'm going to start out, with props for CBP actually, because in the instances where I have had situations, whether it's exam or a 28 or anything like that, anytime I have reached out to them and said, hey, we're going to need more time, they've been receptive. There's never been, since COVID has started, any situation where I've needed either extra time or extra information or to have a conversation with somebody. They've been totally open to doing that and have been helpful. But I did have sort of a 2-week period from hell where I got a NAFTA verification, duty drawback desk audit, and had a big exam going on at the same time. For one importer.
Coordinate these things. You think they compare notes and say, we're crushing Sara Bowersox right now, we need to back off.
Today it's all about Keen. We're just gonna focus on them, laser focus. But that was a lot, and it was a lot to happen at once. But to be fair, the first thing I did with the 228s is reach out, talk to the import specialist. Both of them were like, you can have an extension, you can have a second extension. If you need more time after that, just call me and we'll talk. They were totally open to the fact that, yes, I can get all this stuff, but right now the people that I need to work with either aren't there. In the case of the NAFTA verification, our production in Mexico was actually shut down for COVID safety reasons when I received the notice. So even though I knew they were going to step up and help me, and they did, they hit it out of the park, they just weren't there for the first 2.5 weeks. There wasn't anybody there who could help me. So there was nothing that I could do as far as, the information I needed from origin. So I would say that I'm definitely seeing increased regulatory activity where customs is definitely checking your work. I feel that I am probably seeing that because we are not in a partnership program. I think that our fellow FDRA members that are in, ISA or they're in trusted trader, they're probably not experiencing this because they have a different type of relationship. But I think that for us, small to mid-sized brands who aren't in those programs, I think we're seeing a lot of activity, which is kind of ironic because I've always been a small team, but I know I've talked to other folks who were like, oh yeah, I used to have 2 people and we had to let them go. So they're seeing that increased enforcement activity and they have fewer resources. So it's really a challenging environment.
That is a great point. The furloughing and the laying off or the right sizing of the personnel within our industry, coupled with a heavier burden on enforcement, those two things don't go together very well.
No, it could be a recipe for disaster. For example, if you furloughed folks and you didn't have time to do a decent transition with them and they're responsible for record keeping, how are you going to respond to these things?
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm glad you brought that up. The last thing I want to hit before we bring this to a close is talking about kind of the China dynamic. We spent a lot of time focused on China, the China trade war. Inventories are low. We're looking for capacity because demand is starting to pick up in some aspects. How are you guys thinking about the China dynamic as a sourcing country?
We're thinking about it very carefully. And again, I'm going to go back to my note about classification, because as you know, there are some footwear tariffs that are on list 4B. They don't yet have China 301 duties levied against them. So if we have to move production back to China, and we are having to look at that as our, activity ramps back up, and we're happy to have it, we want to have to make more shoes.
Mm-hmm.
So, but there are capacity constraints, and China's got space right now because a lot of folks left to protect their margins. So we're strategically trying to bring product back that either has no additional China tariff against it, or is a lower duty product where maybe we can just eat that 7.5% and not impact our consumers. So, really it's a balancing act, but it does make for some really crazy order volume.
Right.
With shoes shoes are moving all over the place. And I just had an instance with my finance team today where they couldn't figure out why the duty cost was so high on this shoe. And it turns out that this particular order had moved from origin to origin several times, finally landed in China, but because of all the changes, the costing didn't get fully updated. So it was just one of those things where it came in and they're like, wow, this looks really wrong. And I'm like, well, I have good news and bad news.
Right.
The good news is the duty is right. The bad news is the costing is wrong. So, that's happening as people move around. And I think, again, going back to your classification and just knowing what you have to work with and what you can do with that number really helps you decide, what are you going to move?
Yeah. So the two things as we close out that I'm hearing from you, Sara, are strong relationships on the design development side, the merchandising side with your compliance team, your customs classification folks. We've been preaching this forever, but it's not the time to start costing something out as you're heading towards production with your compliance folks, if that's one person like Sara or a multitude of people. So staying close. And you've heard from Sara that she obviously does that in a really robust way and has a really good working relationship with those people. So that's key, number one. And number two, again, about relationships, have a strong relationship with customs. You may not like the answers they give you, but they are responsive and they're willing to develop those relationships with you over time. And so I think, to me, Sara, those are two really key takeaways of our conversation.
Yeah, I always like to, do the Sun Tzu quote, right? Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. Right. Not that I consider customs to be an enemy. I do consider them to be a partner in my process.
Right.
But I do think of that, we need to make sure that we understand where they're at and what's driving them, and how we can best answer them for our own compliance, but also to make sure their process is smooth. Because ultimately, if you make customs have a bad day, I don't think the next couple of days for you are going to be great either.
That's a great point. No, and I think we will leave it at that. Sara, thank you so much for bringing your expertise to Kicks Over Coffee. I've enjoyed this. I spent a lot of time doing these with my friends in Portland. So there's something about shoes and coffee in Portland that it seems to all work well together. So thanks for coming on.
You're welcome. Bye, everyone.
All right. So folks, make sure you stay tuned to this space, kicksovercoffee.com. We have a whole slew of interviews with folks. And then Gary Rains and I, FDRA's chief economists, have established our little espresso editions. They're 2 or 3 minute hits, 1 shot, 2 shot, 3 shot hits on the economy, on the European marketplace, on imports. So check those out as well. And until next time, have a great day.